Thank you so much, Andy. As I said earlier, it is so good to be back home. I had the opportunity to attend our family's reunion in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, and get a chance to see people I hadn't seen in years. And this also gave you a little break. Because understanding the Bible can sometimes be mentally taxing on some. So it was good to have that little break. But in getting to this understanding of the Bible, remember we've talked about the several different lenses in which to see the Bible through, which gives us a better understanding of this wonderful piece of literature. So today, we're going to look at the Bible through the prophetic lens. And this is one of the most misunderstood and misinterpreted perception of Bible interpretation. Because when we start looking at prophecy, it gets kind of shaky for a lot of us to understand the prophecies or the foretellings of things that the Bible speaks of. Prophecy, first of all, to lay the groundwork, is the foretelling or prediction of what is going to come. Now, it's difficult for us to understand biblical prophecy for several reasons. One thing I want you to know about prophecy is that one way, just one way, that prophecies are foretold or that prophecies are given is from study and experience. By saying that, I mean, and I want you to get this, that if we do not learn from history, we are doomed to repeat it. Right. So there are some things that are prophetic that are based on past experiences. So if you do not learn from past experiences, the prophecy or telling what's going to happen is very simple and very clear. My grandmother did that wonderfully. Her prophecy to me, not the other cousins, just to me, was that I'm going to teach you a lesson without a book. I'm going to teach you something that doesn't come from a book. Now, from my grandmother's standpoint, that meant keep doing what you're doing and you going to get a whooping. That was the prophecy. You're going to get a whooping because of your actions, because of your behaviors. So when we're looking at prophecy, the foretelling of what's coming, it's simply based on, or a lot of it is based on current behavior. Now, as we are understanding or looking at the Bible and its prophecies of foretelling of what's going to happen, we have to look at all of the things that I've presented to you already. One of the lenses that we looked at through the Bible is allegorical. Now, allegory is more or less the symbolic, fictional narrative that conveys, get this, a secondary meaning not explicitly set forth in the literal narrative. It's basically saying that I'm going to put something this way, but I'm really talking about something else. There is an underlying meaning to what I'm saying. Like I just gave you my grandmother's phrase, I'm going to teach you a lesson without a book. You're going to learn something, but it's not going to come from a textbook. The allegory there is she's saying this, but she means something else. When we're dealing with the prophecies or the foretelling of what's going to happen from a biblical perspective, we also have to look at the factual lens. When we're talking about the factual lens, sometimes we are attempting to determine if what we are reading is actual or is it literal? Does it mean exactly what it says? We sometimes miss the meaning because we are not looking at the allegorical and we are looking at it only from the surface level. When you're looking at Bible, there is so much more underlying what is actually said than what we are interpreting. You see, we read a first century writing with a 21st century mentality. And that makes us misunderstand what the prophecy is actually saying. We also have to look at it historically. The history is the presentation of factual accounts of the human experiences. And when we view the Bible through the prophetic interpretive lens, we always must be mindful of the primary audience of who the person was talking to. Who was the oracle talking to? From a historical standpoint, I want you all to get this, if you don't get anything else, that the Bible was not written to you. It was written for you, but we are now actually reading something that was written to someone else thousands of years ago. And they were writing to a specific audience. Also, get this, the audience they were writing to did not speak English. Okay. So since they didn't speak English, they didn't write English. So therefore, we also have to take into consideration the language in which the prophecies were written, in which they were told. When we're looking at the language, we also have to understand that how do I say this? Dealing with the idioms. Put it like that, the idioms. The slang that was used. There was slang that was every culture, every time period has slang that they use. So why wouldn't they use it as well? These idioms are figures of speech. When we're looking at the Semitic languages, be mindful that they were very visual. They were very flowerful. They were very picturesque. They would use words and phrases in a very dramatic way. Nations, I want you to get this now. Nations were symbolized, not in all cases, but, sometimes nations were symbolized as animals. A very strong, powerful nation was symbolically referred to as a lion or a bear or a very strong animal. But then those, I don't really want to say weaker nations, but some nations were symbolized or talked about as being lambs or sheep or goat. So the ability to distinguish when they were talking about an actual sheep or they were referring to a group of people. So the language is very, very important. In those figures of speech, metaphors were used extensively in Easterners' everyday speech. So knowing that metaphors were used a lot in order to understand the prophecies and get a good understanding and a good working knowledge of what was being talked about, you have to understand Middle Eastern culture. Because the culture thousands of years ago, guess what, is not what we do now. So in understanding or being able to really comprehend what they were saying was going to happen, we have to look at those cultures as well. Also, the last thing that I want to remind you of when we're looking at biblical writings is they did one thing more than anything else, and that was amplification. They exaggerated stuff more than we could imagine. One of the biggest amplifications biblically, and I know this is going to destroy some people, but it's just the truth of how things were done back then. And we are all very familiar with when Jesus fed the 5,000. It's a wonderful story, but to say it was 5,000 was almost a way of telling the fish story. You know, the fish that got away? The real fish that got away was about like this, but by the time the fisherman got done telling the story, right, lady, the fish was this big. The amplification, we also have to take into consideration that when it was actually put on papyrus, it had happened hundreds of years before. So if we're going to look at the prophecies of what is going to happen, by the time it was actually written down, with the time period between when they said this was what's going to happen and it was actually written down, was sometimes hundreds, if not thousands of years. So the amplification is very, very important. So these factors must be taken into consideration when we're looking at biblical prophecies. The allegorical lens. Did they mean exactly what they said? The factual lens. Is it really a six-headed dragon? The language. Language is different now than it was then. The culture. Because there are things that they talked about in their culture that we culturally right now have no clue of. We're not accustomed to that. So when we're looking at the prophetic writings of the Bible, there are, get this, and I counted them, 15 Old Testament books that are personally attributed to prophets that had the ability to foretell what is going to happen. Now, when I'm talking about a prophet being able to foretell what is going to happen, one of the things that in our culture is different slightly than in Eastern culture is we have a difficulty understanding prophecy because we confuse a prophet with a fortune teller. I remember some years ago, and some of you probably remember this too, there was a woman that had a 1-800 number that said you can call her and she's going to tell you your future. I think her name was Miss Cleo. There have been other people who have been able to foretell the future for somebody else, but they could not foretell the future for themselves. So we have to understand the difference in a fortune teller and a prophet. So when it comes to the most well-known or the most prominent idea of prophecies, most people go to the book of Revelation. And that's where they get their biggest misinterpretation from, or biggest misunderstanding from. But when we look at the book of Revelation and some of the prophecies, I want you to understand that many biblical prophecies fall under the category of apocalyptic, or the eschatological standpoint. Eschatology is the part of theology, physics, and philosophy which are believed to be the final events of history, commonly referred to as the end of the world or the end of time. That right there is what gets people thrown off when they look at the prophecy, because it's like, that's the end. There is nothing else after that. When we can get beyond this, end of the world, end of time, if we can get past that, you can really get the real meaning of what the prophecy is all about. Because we get stuck right here, that's it. I want you to understand, I want you to get this, that the prophecy is not, it does not stop there. And I'm going to explain that to you, and I'm going to show it to you vividly today. When we talk about these prophecies, what get people stuck at the end of time? They will read something in the Bible such as this. And the third angel poured out its vial upon the rivers and the fountains of water, and they became blood. Another one is, and I saw another mighty angel come down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow about its feet, and its face was as it were the sun, and its feet as pillars of fire. It's also recorded that I will also water with thy blood the land wherein thou swimmest, and even the mountains and rivers shall be full of thee. Last one I'm going to present to you. It says, these have power to shut heaven, and its rain not only in the days of their prophecies, and they have power over waters to turn them to blood and smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will. This is where people look to when they're saying what is going to happen. But I have to present to you this bit of information. Even though the majority of these cases or these prophecies foretold events of doom and gloom, I want you to understand that not all prophecies are about gloom and doom. If we only look at the gloom and doom as being the end, we miss the whole thing. Now, when we begin to see these words, and we want to say that, well, yes, those things are happening now, I have to educate you again on the time period of when it was first told and the hundreds of years that went by before it actually got written down to the thousands of years to when you came on the scene. I want to give you two reasons why we think or why we're going to associate ancient writings with current events. The first of all is because of the cyclical nature of history. Prophecies have a universal quality because human nature is going to repeat itself. So because something was said back then, because most people don't change, most people's situations don't change. And that's a whole lesson in itself right there. That if you want your situations to change, what needs to change? You. See, we're trying to change things that go on outside of us. But when we really look at it, if we see things in a different way, the situation doesn't change, you change. And when you change, the situations around you change too. So if the situations around you aren't changing, guess what? It means you are still the same. That's what makes unity and new thought not so appealing, because we always want to blame outside factors and outside things for what's going on inside of us. Although biblical prophecies usually relate directly to an immediate audiences, their symbols can be indirectly linked to the experiences of future generations. They're indirectly because of human nature, how we act, how we behave, how some of the things that we continue to do, because we are all growing and evolving as spiritual beings. So as we are growing and evolving as spiritual beings, guess what? Paul was doing the same thing. Was growing and evolving as a spiritual being. And there are some things that are just normal across the board for all growing and evolving people. And in order to understand the prophecy, we have to know that we're all growing and evolving. We never get to the point where that's the end, that you stop. Right. Things don't end. Life never ends. It is always moving. Just because it's not in the form that we have been accustomed to does not mean that life has stopped. But we can't understand the prophecy because we get to this wall and say that, oh, this is what it is. There's nothing else. To understand prophecy, you've got to know there's more to the story. Yes, that is foretold. Yes, that doom is being foretold. But that's not all of it. You got to hear the whole story. Now, in order to understand that it goes further than just that, one of my greatest prophets of all time, one that I love more than anything else, because it shows you different things and it shows you the prophetic lens and how it all unfolds, because we don't see what happens after the trouble. We focus just on the trouble. But Ezekiel was a master at telling you, oh yeah, there's some trouble, but there is something more to it. I love the 37th chapter of Ezekiel, because he tells us something so powerful and so profound about a vision, about a prophecy, about what was going to happen. In the first chapter, or the first verse, he says this, and the hand of the Lord was upon me and carried me out in the spirit of the Lord and set me down in the midst of the valley, which was full of dry bones. I can still remember all of the excitement that would go through the church anytime a preacher talked about the valley of dry bones. Because Ezekiel's experience was somewhat different than other prophets. You see, other prophets had visions. Other prophets heard the voice of God. Other prophets saw the handwriting on the wall. But Ezekiel said, my experience was just a little bit different. Not only was I placed in the valley of dry bones, God himself asked me a personal question. I'm in this valley of dry bones, and the Spirit of the Lord caused me to pass around about them, and he said unto me, Son of man, can these bones live? Not only did I see this vision of dry bones, God sought my opinion. What did I think? And again he said unto me, prophesy unto these bones, and say to them, O ye dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. You see, we get stuck and say, yeah, there was dry bones. Oh, wow. But Ezekiel let you know that there was something more to this. Also, remember when I said that we have to look at the historical part of this to know who the oracle was talking to and understand what they were talking about? Ezekiel let you know right up front what he meant by the valley of dry bones. Because at first glance, most people are looking at a skeleton, right? When we think of dry bones, a skeleton. But that's not what he was talking about. In the 11th verse, it says, and then he said unto me, Son of man, these bones are the whole house of Israel. The whole house of Israel had become like dried bones. No life. Nothing exciting going on, no movement, no activity. So when there's no activity, when there's no action, he's saying that's what a valley of dry bones is. Any environment you are in where there's no growth, where there's no progress, you're in a valley of dry bones. Now sometimes we experience our own personal valley of inactivity, of dry bones. But see, the vision didn't just stop there. At the 40th chapter of the book of Ezekiel, he tells of another experience that he had. There's yet another prophecy, and I love this one because this prophecy starts, this vision starts at the 40th chapter where he says that the Spirit of the Lord took me and showed me a building, showed me a castle, so to speak, showed me a palace. And then at this palace, when you walk in this one gate, there was an inner gate. And once you got in that inner gate, there was an inner court. And then there was yet another outer court. And the whole vision began to unfold as to what this place looked like. But then there was something else that happened after he was given this tour of what this palace, of what this castle, what this house would look like, what this mansion would look like. He says that the Spirit of the Lord brought me back to the front door of this place. And this is where the story picks up that I want to bring to you, is that after he showed me all of that, he brought me back to the door of the house. And at the door of the house, behold, waters issued out from under the threshold of the house eastward. Now, looking at eastward, I can't go too much into that, but there was a reason he was talking about the waters flowing eastward, because that meant something to them. A lot of times to us, that doesn't mean that much. But in this vision, foretelling what was going to happen, he got back to the door and said, look down, watch these waters flowing out. And then not only did he say, watch that these waters are flowing out from this doorway, from this threshold, from this door of the house. I'm going to show you something else that's going to happen. These waters, as he went further, the Spirit of the Lord measured 1,000 cubits. Now, I have not done the actual research or haven't found how long a cubit actually is. But he went out 1,000 of these forms of measurements, and this water at that first 1,000 had gotten to his knee, to his ankles. Now at that point, most of us is cool in water up to your ankles. We can splash around in some water like that, not be worried and not have any problems, right? But the prophecy didn't stop there. It took him out another 1,000 cubits. And the water was around his waist. Now, still there in water, I'm pretty cool. Most people are. But the prophecy was, that's not far enough. Took him out another 1,000 cubits. And at this point, the water was too deep to swim in. He's got you in this vision to where some people would say it's the end of time. Look, we're going to get to the place where we can't swim. We're going to get to the point where there's nothing we can do. I have no floaty device to save me. I don't have a life jacket. Oh, the doom and gloom is there. He's showing you, look, you're going to get to the point where you can't swim. There's no land around. You have nothing left. And that's where people stop. And that's why they get a problem. They have a problem with the prophecy, because they get to that point and they don't see anything further. But Ezekiel showed us that that's not the case. A lot of times we see the problem and stop there. But Ezekiel said, in all of this confusion, in all of this problem, I want to take you now back to where we started. Once we got back to the door where all of this started from, it's in verse 7. And now when I had returned, well, remember, we were just at a point where there was no land, there was no floating device, there was no life jacket, there was nothing that we had. But when he got back, when he returned to the bank, there were trees on either side. So I want you to take note of this, that there were no trees when we left on this journey. There was nothing there. That these waters issued out towards the east country and go down into the desert and go down into the sea, which brought forth the seas. Get this, the waters shall be healed. You're in this water that has gotten you to the point where you can't swim. There's nothing you can do. But it gets them back and it says, look on either side of where you started. This water is healing water, and it shall come to pass that everything that liveth, which moveth, whithersoever the river shall come, they shall live. You see, you think that these waters is a problem because you can't swim in it. These waters are healing waters. There were no trees here before, which says to us that when we allow the prophecy to unfold and that we can see past where the trouble is, that's going to be your healing. Where there once were no trees, there are now trees. Where there once was confusion, there's now harmony. Where there once was no money, there's going to be tons of it flowing. When you get past that point where you think that's it. We've got to be able to see the whole story. We get stuck on the prophecy and don't see what comes afterwards. And that's the problem that some people have with reading the book of Revelation. I'm not denying that it looks like doom, that it looks like gloom, that it can look very, very horrific, and that's because of what the cinema has done to it. That's because that's what people see. They get scared and they get in that point of the water where it's not there. It doesn't make any sense anymore. But when you really go to the book of Revelation and you get past all of that, you will see in the 21st chapter and the first verse where it says, and I saw, after all of that doom and gloom, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, because the first heaven and the first earth have passed away. You see, we can't see the new earth and the new heaven because we still hung up on the first one. Right. Then it says, and I, John, saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down from heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and I will dwell with them, and they shall be my people, and God himself shall be with them. Even though all of that other stuff has been presented, even though all of that other stuff has been there, the fourth verse says, and God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. There shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying. And he that sat upon the throne said, behold, I make all things new. It's okay when you see the gloom and doom. But just know that there's more to the story. Before Brad sings, I'm going to tell my regular story. Because it is so fitting. Where the little girl wanted to ride a pony. And when her father got her to the farm, the other kids, they had gotten there late. And all the other kids had gotten on the ponies and went off. And they were riding the trail. The other kids on the ponies, they riding the trail. And that one little girl got there and went and looked in the stable. And all she saw was the manure. That's all she saw. That's equivalent to how some people see the prophecies. They only see the manure. They see the ugly part of it. They see the gloom and the doom. But that little girl got excited. And she was jumping up and down, and her parents couldn't understand why she was so happy to see all of the manure. But the little girl knew something that I wish all of us could get, that I wish all of you could get. That girl knew that with all of that manure, there had to be a pony somewhere. She knew that ponies produced manure, and if it was the manure was there, that a pony had to be close by. So when we're looking at all of the confusion, when we're looking at everything that's going on the news, when there's confusion, when there's discomfort, you got to be, I'm asking us all to be like that little girl, to say that there got to be a pony somewhere.